This is TWiT.
In case so there's two things that I noticed that are kind of very much related here. First of all, there's a lawsuit that's happening. I'm pretty sure we've talked about it on the show before. 37 attorneys general in the U.S. Google, antitrust, all that stuff. Basically, looking at anti-competitive behavior on the case of Google's side of things and Android and everything. According to this antitrust lawsuit, Google, it was reported in this lawsuit, or revealed anyways, that Google had $8.5 billion of gross profit in 2019, $7 billion in operating revenue, which is just, it's more than anything, it's just kind of an interesting data point, right? Like, obviously, Google is, we've known that Google is doing pretty okay when it comes to, making money off the Android ecosystem, be it through, ads and the exposure that they get to people, people's browsing behavior and how that ties into ad revenue and everything, but also through the Play Store, because they get a certain cut. They get I think it's 30%, 15%, depending on where in the stage of the developer's release. I'm trying to remember. It's like that 1 year. If you are under a certain amount of profit in that year, then you end up, I think, giving Google 15%. No, I could be getting that wrong. What is it, Chris?
It's essentially a tax bracket. So the first $1 million US that you earn in the year is Google take 15% of that, and then after that it reverts to the 30% for every dollar from $1 million.
Right. Okay. And that 30% had been in place long before this kind of new avenue had been thrown into that revenue model. So it had been just flat out 30%. Same with Apple. I mean, they were all kind of doing the same thing. And so, largely people weren't really questioning it, but they are now.
The one difference I would say is that Google, certainly when it started out, didn't really have Google Play in-app billing, and you could charge people directly.
Right.
So Google did change the rules to bring them more in line with Apple.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, and that's a really good distinction, because this really has something more to do with in-app billing than just billing in general, right? Like, if in-app billing would be, I've got an in-app purchase that has to be using Google's payment model versus I'm just selling an app through the App Store. Is there a distinction between those two? There
is. There certainly is from a technical point of view, which is actually a giant pain. They're completely different libraries. I think as far as Google Play is concerned, they're both treated as just revenue.
Okay. So that's kind of the first part. That the 8.5 billion, it's just interesting to have a number to point to and be like, okay, Google's making some serious money here. We kind of knew that, but it's nice to have a number. Combine that with the bigger story, or at least the more timely story right now. Both Apple and Google's app stores, they've been enjoying this kind of lucrative revenue for however long it's been with these in-app payments. And now they're finding resistance and force in all directions, but primarily right now, South Korea. There's a bill passed in South Korea that's really aiming to stand in the way of app stores requiring the use of their own in-app payment systems. They've got penalties in place once this passes, which it is expected to be put into place in days. So those penalties would be a 3% fine of South Korean revenue by the country's media regulator. So they're kind of levying that fine. And of course, Apple and Google, they're arguing that using a payment system outside of their own systems, it's inherently insecure. There's high risk of fraud. It has the risk of privacy violations, which I don't think is untrue. I think there is truth to that, right? Like they own the keys to the kingdom. So, I guess that technically means.
I would push back on that.
Okay, I'm curious.
I would push
All right,
back
tell me.
Simply because, those same external payment systems exist when you ride an Uber. It exists when you order something on DoorDash. It exists when you buy something on Amazon. What's the difference?
Okay.
Fair. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, cool.
It exists when
Google-
you subscribe to the New York Times online, or make
No,
a
it's true.
PayPal payment, or use Coinbase. Like
Okay.
there's no different. The only difference is the fact that it's a digital good. And I just think we have reached the point where, with mobile devices being, for many people, their primary computing device, I just don't think it's reasonable that gatekeepers be this sole party that takes 30% of all digital transactions. I really feel that as we enter a new era of Web3 technologies, it's just unreasonable to think that that gatekeepers can be taking that much for without being subjected to any competition whatsoever. And I don't begrudge Google or Apple's desire to charge 30%. They should be able to charge exactly what they want. Like, take Google's. I implemented the new Google billing library recently, and Google have done a lot of work, like adding offline purchases of goods from the Play Store. So you can walk into a 7-Eleven and buy an Action Launcher upgrade in cash. And so setting that up is something that has taken a lot of work by Google's end, and they deserve a cut. I don't begrudge them that in the least. And they should be able to choose what they think their cut is, but it should be open to competition. Someone should be able to say, okay, well, look, maybe I don't want to allow for the such purchases. I just want to use Stripe and take a 3% fee. Like, they just should be open for competition is my feeling on it.
Yeah. And let me correct myself earlier. I wasn't necessarily agreeing with the fact that doing it outside of those systems is inherently insecure. I think what I was more agreeing with is that Google and Apple have the resources within their payment models to protect against those things. That's not at all to say that anybody else couldn't protect against them either. I fully agree that Google and Apple have the resources to do well in, and of course they're not perfect either in doing that. But I completely agree with this and everything that you said, Chris. Now, what do you think about this, Chris? Because Google says that this also enables Android to stay free. More or less, they said that. What do you think about that?
I look, at this point, I kind of feel like we're talking about companies that are valued. Apple, last time I checked, was valued $2.4 trillion, which is larger than Canada's GDP. Google is 1 point something trillion, like trillion with a T. Like, we used to talk about companies being big as being worth billions. Now we're in the trillions, and these companies are under pressure like any other stock, because anyone who buys their shares is looking for a percentage return. So they need to grow meaningfully. And I just really feel like we need to favor competition and allowing different ideas to flourish over trillion-dollar companies getting such massive percentages without any hint of and disallowing competition. As I said, if Google and Apple pick 30%, they should be able to pick that, but they just should not be able to be the have no competition and to prevent people from even telling users, hey, you can go buy in a browser and get it for 30% cheaper. I think those things are just so blatantly anti-competitive, and I really welcome the ruling in South Korea. And Australia's looking at a similar thing as well, which makes me happy. So I just and especially when, like, certainly in Apple's case, when they talk about, they just do such a masterful job at conflating privacy with the App Store cut, and they're just so completely disparate things. And Apple are obviously, all these companies are very good at lobbying. I mean, Google as well. It's not like Google, the only money Google makes from the Play Store is Google Play. They make, a huge amount of money from the fact that, as I mentioned, like Swirl's feature meter is built around AdMob. AdMob on Android is an absolutely massive earner. For not Swirl. So I'm not saying Swirl is contributing to Google's bottom line, but the the fact that so many free-to-play apps, free-to-play games rather, have, watch this reward ad to unlock this sword, like that is a huge, revenue earner. The Google search widget that comes pre-installed on all the home screens, that's a massive earner. So I think Play Store revenues are but part of the way that Google monetizes, Android. And I don't think offering a bit of competition is a bad thing.
I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Yeah, it's hard to argue with competition. I mean, like, that's the thing, is that, like, this is the catch-22 with all of this, and like watching these lawsuits both on the Google side and on the Apple side, follow through with it. If you're following along, and at the crux of it is that how antitrust or anti-competitive tactics are they doing, but at the same time, is there a question of scale where these companies and these marketplaces and these islands of iOS and Android and stuff like that have gotten so large? Who's trying to compete with them, and who's stopping? Like, is what they're doing what Google does truly stop anyone from competing them? Or if GetJar really, was able to raise $500 million and really make a go at it, could they make a run at Google and Android? And I guess the best argument is Amazon, is that Amazon tried and didn't really, or they found their niche within hardware and that sort of thing. But I really have to wonder, is that, like, I'm all for competition, and I think that's what makes, that's a good piece of capitalism. We've talked a lot about the bad parts of capitalism, but I wonder if these have gotten so big that they're too big to compete with, even if you could, So
I think it's a reasonable point. I think some of the details that came out recently in the discovery with Epic's case versus Google, and how the fact that Google basically made a bunch of deal and did calculations as far as how much money how much Play Store revenue they would lose if a bunch of game developers jump ship to the Epic Games app on Android, and made a bunch of side deals saying, we'll give you this Google Cloud revenue and that sort of, or this amount of free advertising on YouTube. I think that's where it's like, that makes it really hard for just straight competition. If you're going to other parties and offering these sweeteners. And I have no idea about the legalities, about what's legal there, but I think that makes it very hard for other stores to come pre-installed on Android phones, and without, with it being as convoluted as it is, really, to install different stores. If companies can't make deals to meaningfully ship an alternate store on a device, it makes it very, very hard to compete.
It makes it hard to compete, or was Google just very good at their business? That's where either side of it. I think that, Google, because they grew over the past 20 years and diversified and added new services and things like that, they're able to be more competitive. I mean, I just feel like you could look at all this and flip the prism and look at it in the other direction. And that's what makes this stuff so hard. And that's what makes, like, when the EU gets involved and is just kind of like slaps down any sort of competitive practices. And that, it makes it a little challenging, because why should what a company sees as a benefit of working with them, why should that be seen as anti-competitive? And I'm being devil's advocate here. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but
no, I think I mean, there's no. It's inarguable that I'm not, to be clear, I'm not coming on here with a and a personal agenda myself. Like, I have very mixed feelings about it. Like, I certainly think that companies that, Google invested billions in not just Android, but in, Google Play services and maps. And I think Google absolutely is within its right to see, not just a return, but a meaningful return on that investment. I'm a capitalist. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I think when it gets into some of the details that have come out in the discovery thus far, it makes me a bit uncomfortable that Google are actively going out of their way to offer these sweeteners, which, in a sense, Android is far more open than iOS, for instance. iOS, there's no capability to sideload apps or download alternate stores. Those things are technically possible. But as the platform holder and the company that makes, that has, is able to withhold Google Play services and Maps and Gmail and YouTube, that comes with it a bit of power. And it does seem like, that power has been perhaps wielded too strongly. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea how whether that's actually the case. I just think reading it, I would welcome more competition in any space.
Yeah.